The Bible as a Handbook for Understanding Self. Part 7 Final. By Shane Miller. The Book of Job. The Pattern of Man. It is not an afterthought to conclude our study of the Bible with a look through the Book of Job. Whereas our study of the Revelation reveals what happens within the body, mind, and soul of an individual when he decides to return to the original state of grace. The Book of Job can be said to show the external results of this process. In Job, we view from the outside the changes taking place within the individual as they are described in Revelation. The story of Job is not the story of a man who lived somewhere, sometime in the dim past. Job is the story of collective man, anywhere, anytime. What happens to Job happens to us all in one form or another. The Cayce readings tell us that the Book of Job was written by Melchizedek, priest king of Salem, whose story is briefly told in Genesis, the 14th chapter, verses 18 through 20. Melchizedek broke bread and drank wine with Abraham upon the occasion of Lot's rescue from his Arab kidnappers. The breaking of bread and drinking of wine have since become of significance to all Christians. The story of Job opens with the man existing in a complete state of innocence. He is totally acceptable to God. His situation shows him to be also in a state of opulence and abundance. The terms of his wealth are given in pastoral statistics, meaningful to a pastoral people. Job is shown to have, moreover, a wife, 7 sons and 3 daughters. Why, then, the scholars have asked, should Job be subjected to all the calamity which later falls upon him? Why are we, in our day, experiencing our current trials and tribulations if God truly loves his creatures? The question has troubled the heart of man throughout the ages. Job's conduct and actions are such that he seems beyond reproach. He makes daily sacrifices to God, and he even prays for people in case they might have sinned. He prays for his sons and daughters in this spirit. Such is the state of God consciousness found in Job and the story. The drama begins with the sons of God coming before their Creator to present themselves to him. Among them, however, appears Satan. Satan apparently is a stranger to God, for he asks, "Whence comest thou?" Satan's answer proclaims his presence to be the result of going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. Satan seems to have been born of man's concern for the things of the earth, his measuring, evaluating, and portioning out of the treasure found in the world. God then holds up Job as a shining example of his creation. At the apex of all creation, he is incorruptible. Satan, however, declares that Job is hardly an example of anything. Why, if God were to take away Job's riches, he would curse thee to thy face, Satan declares. What follows is almost like a play. God places all of Job's holdings in Satan's power, but warns him not to touch Job himself. There are no other conditions. Satan can use all the means at his command to test Job, but he must not touch Job's soul. At this point Satan separates himself from God, and somehow in this we sense a similarity to passages found in Genesis and Revelation. Satan is now acting out the same pattern as the serpent in Eden. From this point on, in 2 episodes, Job loses all his holdings and property, all his children and his health. The passage in Revelation which deals with this drying up of the functions of healing and supply within the soul describes 2 olive trees as having the power to withhold the rains from heaven. The results of such an action would bring about exactly the same conditions as are shown in Job's situation. Unexpectedly to Satan, however, Job does not curse God nor does he charge God foolishly. Moreover, when Job's wife comes to him exhorting him to curse God and die, which would presumably relieve Job of his burden, he turns away from her advice. Job has known God and cannot forsake him. Job's wife deserts him now, and Job is alone. The three comforters. Job's comforters now appear. They are interesting because their prototypes are always with us. Eliphaz, the first of the trio, is the kind of mystic who has had one experience. And this, of course, makes him completely adequate to render the advice that will lift Job up out of his miserable state. Bildad, the second man, is a religious dogmatist who goes by the book. He is the fellow who has really studied the word but has somehow overlooked its application in daily life in terms of patience and long-suffering. But for all that, he is very glib, and is willing to offer a large helping of wisdom if given half a chance. Zophar, the third man, is the very bright and shrewd fellow who knows what God will do under any and all circumstances. One thing they all have in common: obviously none of them has ever experienced love. Eliphaz begins by presenting his credentials, his single mystical experience. Job has given comfort to many, Eliphaz goes on to say, and now that he is afflicted, he is ready to faint. Why is this? Eliphaz, being relatively free of boils himself, after telling of the dream he has had, implies that if Job hadn't sinned everything would be all right. Does not God look after his own? Job murmurs that he wouldn't mind a little sympathy and compassion, in effect, less preaching and the like. Since Eliphaz has no sympathy or compassion to give, he continues his preaching. In his anguish, Job complains that even when he would escape his condition in sleep, God frightens him through his dreams, making him long for death. Bildad, in his turn, states bluntly that Job is a hypocrite. He must have sinned secretly. God doesn't punish anyone without a cause. Let Job ask for forgiveness, and all will be made right again. Since Bildad is a traditionalist and a dogmatist, he specializes in platitudes, big ones, small ones, middle-sized ones. There is simply no end to them. Job admits he is a sinner. He is unable to justify himself, but he is no hypocrite. In his agony, he wonders what satisfaction God can have in persecuting one who longs for death. Yet Job will not charge God foolishly nor forsake him. But he does wonder, and these wonderings are the mental side of his trial. Like a man crucified, Job tosses back and forth from one position to another in a vain attempt to ease his mental pain. Zophar, the third member of the trio, also thinks that Job is a liar and a hypocrite. Anybody knows that God punishes the guilty and rewards the innocent. Since Zophar is the fellow who knows what God will do in every circumstance, it is plain to him that the very affliction of Job shows he has sinned. Why not own up to it like a man? To this man whose mind is already made up and whose judgment is swift, Job declares, "Miserable comforters are ye all." Job longs now to go before God to state his side of the case. If he could just explain to God how things are with him, he is sure that God would understand and lift his burden. God must be reasonable, he must. Since God is presumably present even while we are developing our thesis, the flaw in this line of thinking is apparent. So, there are touches of humor throughout, even though a serious story is being told. Once Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar have agreed that Job is a liar and a hypocrite, Elihu comes on the scene. The mystic, the dogmatist, and the shrewd but glib religionist have had their say. Elihu is the man who is so far advanced in his studies that he can talk on God's behalf. Very generously, Elihu portrays God as being a most responsible kind of being, deeply concerned with the welfare of his creatures. God is actually at great pains to deliver man from himself. Seemingly, Elihu has no great use for his three predecessors. Since they had found no answers for Job, they had condemned him. Since they could not help him, they had written him off. Elihu, in his turn, writes off the three comforters who had become scolders and beraters, but finally reveals that he himself has no patience, and so joins the others in a dearth of love. Again, Job is alone. God speaks. All this time, these men have been talking about God as if he were not present. It is now time for God to speak. The very atmosphere becomes charged. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. After a full declaration of his works and his glory, the Lord reminds Job. Have the gates of death been opened unto thee? Or hast thou seen the doors of the shadow of death? Hast thou perceived the breadth of the earth? Declare if thou knowest it all. This is a terrible moment for Job. His understanding of God has been gained through hearsay and academic study. Now he is face to face with reality. Limitations spring forth in his consciousness in bold relief. Never has Job felt so small and insignificant. And yet, now that he knows the truth of his situation, he can act in accordance with truth as it really is. It is not a question of what Job has done or hasn't done, it is a question of his relationship with God. Job is no longer thinking of God, he is filled with him now, and God's very voice sounds within his own heart. He is within. Job has now reached the point where he can be trusted with the stewardship of all things, all knowledge of heaven and earth. No longer is he accident-prone. In rebuking the false comforters, the Lord charges Job to pray for them, that the healing of all the old wounds may bring together all the parts. For their part, the comforters are instructed to offer burnt sacrifices, according to the ancient custom, in Job's presence. Once the reconciliation has been made between God and man, the story tells, Job is released from his cycle of trials and the Lord bestows on Job twice as much as he had before. As the curse of Adam limitation is removed, all his holdings are doubled, and the two witnesses, the olive trees, within his soul can now function freely, the laws of healing and supply. So with the conclusion of the story of Job we come to an end of that quest on which man has been engaged since he entered the garden. Freed from evils or earthly limitations, he is ready for the first time to be a companion to his Creator. For the first time he has attained a position worthy of God's friendship and respect, which are separate from his eternal love, entirely by himself.